Hey guys, what's going on? It's Ben here. I am back again for another video. This is going to be doing part 5 of my little series on my favorite NBA seasons of all time. As I have started with previous videos in this series, my reason for creating this series is that I think that certain seasons in NBA history stand out more than others. There are certain storylines that go on in different years that are more compelling and interesting than other years, or the playoffs are much more entertaining in certain years than other years. Um, and basically, I wanted to highlight some of my personal favorites from watching as a viewer and ones that pulled me in more than others and the reasons for that. So today's going to be a continuation of that series, and the season that I'm covering today is the 2012 to 13 NBA season. So let's get into it. So coming off of the 11 to 12 season, the Heat were reigning champs, and they stepped it up to another level this next season. They won 66 games in the regular season with, I think it was a 21 game win streak possibly, or 20 game win streak, something like that in the mix in there. Also, something pretty cool I thought was that the Knicks, for once, were a really good, prominent team in the East. They had a core of like Carmelo and J.R. Smith, Amari Stoudemire, Tyson Chandler, and then at point guard they had brought back Raymond Felton, who they had previously traded away for Melo. Then you also had the up and coming Indiana Pacers doing well that season, and then you had the Brooklyn Nets as well doing well. This was the season before they traded for Garnett and Pierce, so the core this season was um, Deron Williams, Joe Johnson, Gerald Wallace, and Brook Lopez. Then you also had Chicago hanging on as sort of a meddling team without Derrick Rose. Their primary players were basically Luol Deng, Joakim Noah, and Boozer. But Boozer had fallen off a bit, so it's basically Luol Deng is their best offensive player, Joakim Noah is their main guy on defense. Then rounding it out, you had the Hawks and then the Celtics, who had fallen off quite a bit at this point, and Garnett and Pierce, who were basically on their last legs as far as being legit NBA talent. And then you had Milwaukee as the 8th seed with Brandon Jennings and Monte Ellis and JJ Redick as their leading players. Then in the West, you had Oklahoma City coming off the finals loss, bouncing back, being the 1 seed with 60 wins. Then you had the Spurs with 58, Denver with 57, Clippers with 56, Memphis with 56. So it's pretty cool that between the 2 and the 5 seed there were 2 games of separation, and between the 1 and the 5 seed there was only 4 games of separation. That's pretty unheard of and pretty competitive, which I of course like. And if you haven't heard me say this in previous videos, I do enjoy parity in the NBA. Not that every team has a chance to win the title, but just that more than 3 to 4 teams have a chance, and I would say this season is a good example of that. Then you had Golden State as a 6th seed with 47 wins, Los Angeles with 45, and Houston with 45. This was the first season of James Harden in Houston because Oklahoma City traded him to avoid going too deep into the luxury tax. So we got to see him tear it up, average 25 points a game. We saw Jeremy Lin in Houston, who was very average that season. And then, of course, with the Lakers in Los Angeles, we got to see the failed Dwight Howard experiment. Kobe basically having his last season in his prime. Steve Nash there missing, I think, about half the season, if not more. Pau Gasol being really mediocre to average, and Ron Artest being very mediocre to average, or just being Ron Artest, who at that point was like 34 and wasn't a fantastic NBA player anymore, just a good solid starter. But basically, it was a failed experiment, as I previously said, and the team just didn't gel well together at all. Dwight rushed back after injury and wasn't fully himself. Steve Nash was a shell of himself, and Pau Gasol and Artest just didn't really know how they fit into this team with these other big names coming in, so they didn't play up to as well as they usually did. And so Kobe just had to basically take on a huge load that he wasn't prepared to take on, and as a result, he basically drove himself to an injury. I feel like he tore his Achilles and he was out for the rest of the season. Like once they got into the playoffs, once they had clinched the playoff spot, then he was out for the rest of the season. So they got swept in the playoffs pretty early on. As for the playoffs themselves, in the first round you had a 7-game series between Chicago and Brooklyn, which was somewhat entertaining. I wanted Brooklyn to win, so I was kind of disappointed. And as if you don't know, I always consider a 6-game series to be competitive. So a minimum of 6 games, either 6 or 7, is a competitive series to me. So you had Indiana and Atlanta in the first round go 6. You had New York and Boston go 6. You had Oklahoma City and Houston in the other side go 6 games. You had Memphis and the Clippers go 6, and then you had Denver and Golden State go 6. So out of the 8 series in the first round, 6 of them I would have considered pretty competitive series, which is pretty good. In the second round, not as many. You had Indiana and New York go 6, and same with San Antonio and Golden State. In each of the conference finals, the West wasn't competitive because San Antonio swept Memphis, but the East went 7 between Miami and Indiana, so that's pretty entertaining. And a lot of people thought that Indiana would win that series and pull off a huge upset, but they didn't. The Heat rallied and won. And then in the finals, you had a classic 7-game series between Miami and San Antonio. Of course, there are some infamous, or not infamous, but very notable moments like Ray Allen sinking the buzzer beater in Game 6, and then LeBron just dominating Game 7. Both were some pretty cool moments and games, and overall, that was a really cool series to watch, along with the Miami-Indiana series in the Eastern Conference Finals. But I think what I thought was pretty cool was out west. Yes, you had Oklahoma City, who people sort of had as the prohibitive favorite to get to the finals, but you did have all these other really good teams like San Antonio. People thought they had a good chance. Same with honestly basically the Clippers were the other really big contender, but Denver and the Grizzlies were also in the mix of people like thought that they had an outside chance of getting pretty far too. This was the first glimmer we saw of Golden State being a pretty serious threat. They had gotten to the second round, first upsetting the Nuggets in the first round, and then pushing San Antonio to 6 games in the second round. Golden State was up 2-1 against them in that series before the Spurs kind of got their handle on things and took over. Can we imagine what it would have been like if in the Western Conference Finals that year we would have had Golden State versus Memphis? That would have been pretty crazy. I probably would have picked Golden State to win that series, and then we all would have gotten the super cool Miami versus Golden State matchup that we never got. Again, Miami probably would have won that series pretty easy, but it would have been really cool to see nonetheless. But as things were, we still got some good basketball this season. LeBron was MVP. Rookie of the Year was Anthony Davis. Oh no, Rookie of the Year was Damian Lillard actually. Defensive Player of the Year was Marc Gasol. Sixth Man, J.R. Smith. Coach of the Year, George Karl. Paul George, Most Improved Player. All makes quite a bit of sense. I think that, okay, so as far as teams I thought could contend in the East for the title, during the regular season, I really only thought the Heat and the Knicks. I didn't think much of the Pacers really. I thought like, oh, Paul George is improving, but they'll probably be like a second round exit pretty easy. I was pretty shocked that the Knicks lost to them because I thought the Knicks had such a really good stacked team. But the Pacers just played lockdown defense on them, and Paul George really started to come into his own and play really well. So the Knicks just kind of got outdueled and outdone in every regard, and so they lost that series. And then, as I've reiterated, Miami and Indiana was a really good series to watch. If you haven't seen that, go back and watch it. Very competitive throughout the whole thing, and as I say, when it came to Indiana being up 3-2, most people thought that Indiana was going to go to the finals, and it would be a San Antonio Indiana finals, which would have been much less entertaining, but just the way it goes. So let's see here. Other notable things from this season. You had a rookie, Anthony Davis, who was doing pretty well. I think he's averaging around 14 and 12 his rookie year. This is the last year Milwaukee made the playoffs for a bit. I think they missed it the next year. Okay, they actually made it in 2015, but this is sort of the end of the Brandon Jennings era in Milwaukee. I think J.J. Redick left for the Clippers in the offseason, and then you had Monte Ellis, who I think also left. I believe he went to Dallas after this. Yeah, that's right, he went to Dallas. And then Brandon Jennings went to Detroit after this is where he went. As far as other notable things, let's see here. This is the season. I'm trying to remember. Dallas didn't make the playoffs. That was pretty surprising because they had been a pretty perennial playoff team. I think between like something like 2000 and 2016, this was the only season that they didn't make the playoffs, which is pretty astounding. As far as why they didn't make it, they just didn't have a great team. It was pretty average. It was one of those teams where Mark Cuban had basically gutted the whole team in hopes of attracting a big free agent like Darren Williams, who then didn't come, or Dwight Howard, who had opted into his contract, so he didn't come. So it was a failed experiment. He had to fill the roster with really nobodies, basically. But yeah, I don't know. This is just one of my favorite seasons because we saw the really cool winning streak from the Heat, and we didn't really know how long would that go. How about that? And then as far as the playoffs in the West, you saw Russell Westbrook go down in the first round. So then it was like, okay, the West is wide open now, and anyone can win it. Maybe Oklahoma City still wins it without Russ. Maybe San Antonio or the Clippers come up and do it. We didn't really know, but it was a pretty entertaining playoffs and season overall. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you guys check out some of the other ones as well if you have interest in these most my favorite seasons in NBA history. And I hope you guys have a good day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.